It's 10 o'clock. This is Sky News at 10. Our top story. Staking it all on stopping the boats. The Prime Minister says flights will begin, come what may, though not until July.
Enough is enough. No more prevarication, no more delay. Parliament would sit there tonight and vote no matter how late it goes.
There have voted content 240, not content 211.
The parliamentary opposition to Rishi Sunak's bill is slowly subsiding. It's expected to end before midnight tonight. Also this evening, the catch and kill cover-ups, part of a criminal scheme to corrupt the prosecution on Donald Trump as he finally goes on trial. We see the long shadow of the Israel-Hamas war on both sides of the Atlantic, with protests at a prestigious US university, meaning that students are told to stay away. After 9 months off-air and allegations over sexually explicit photos, the BBC's top news presenter Hugh Edwards resigns on medical advice. And he's the party leader, staring at what looks like a political open goal. We quiz Keir Starmer on foreign football ownership and school sport. And we'll take a first look at tomorrow's front pages. That's in our press preview from 10:30 right through to midnight. Hello there, good evening. The Prime Minister is on the verge tonight of winning parliamentary approval in his attempt to send migrants crossing the Channel to Rwanda. The resistance in the House of Lords has come down to one issue, that Rwanda would not be declared safe until an independent monitoring body was consulted. But MPs are expected to override that again, and opponents in the Lords may then finally give in. Rishi Sunak said today that flights would begin, come what may, but not until July, and that both an airfield and airline had been identified to deliver the policy. We'll get the latest on the parliamentary manoeuvres in a moment, but first, our political editor, Beth Rigby, has this report.
2 long years since the government announced plans to send asylum seekers to Rwanda. Countless delays, a Prime Minister out of patience.
No ifs, no buts. These flights are going to Rwanda.
The PM at the podium with a message to peers that he will keep them sitting in the Lords until this bill has passed. And with a new promise, regular flights to Rwanda will begin in July.
Enough is enough. No more prevarication, no more delay. Parliament would sit there tonight and vote no matter how late it goes. And the success of this deterrent doesn't rest on one flight alone. It rests on the relentless, continual process of successfully and permanently removing people to Rwanda with a regular rhythm of multiple flights every month over the summer and beyond until the boats are stopped. These flights will go, come what may. No foreign court will stop us from getting flights off.
Prime Minister, you state your reputation on this policy. Is this a moment of success for you when that bill passes?
Success is when the boats have been stopped. That's what the country expects. That's what the government and I are committed to delivering.
Peers still trying to amend the legislation. MPs keep voting those changes down. This ping-pong going on late into the night, but eventually Labour Lords will fold.
At the end of the day, the House of Commons is the elected body. All we can do is make suggestions. If we're getting absolutely nowhere, the Lords doesn't go on and on and on. There comes a point where the House of Commons gets its way.
Others arguing that the policy is a bad one and simply won't work.
He's doomed to fail. The boats have not been stopped. The way you stop the boats is by dealing with the criminal gangs who are being paid to bring people in boats, and the government is doing some of this, increasing the administrative level at which asylum seekers and refugees are dealt with. That's not rocket science. What they're doing at the moment is near to the realms of fantasy.
You might be sick of hearing about the Rwanda plan, and the legislation's about to go through Parliament imminently anyway, so why still pay attention? Because quite simply, the Prime Minister has staked his premiership on this policy, and he actually told me today that success means stopping the boats, not just planes, away. On top of that, he said he doesn't want just the odd flight, but a regular rhythm of planes to Rwanda. So he's doubling down on his promises. And all of this matters because in a few months, he's going to ask you, the voter, whether you want him to remain as your Prime Minister.
That if you come here illegally, you won't be able to stay.
Getting buy-in this morning from cabinet ministers as the Prime Minister tries to get back onto the front foot. But none of this comes in time for the more immediate ballot box test of May's local elections, which could well send his premiership into freefall once more. Beth Rigby, Sky News, Westminster.
Well, our chief political correspondent, John Craig, is inside Parliament tonight. So, John, how close are we then to this bill finally being passed?
Well, at the moment, MPs are debating the bill. The one amendment that Beth referred to that was passed by quite a healthy majority, actually, 240 to 211 in the House of Lords this evening. Labour sources tell me that's a bigger majority than they were expecting. The Commons will chuck it out. Stephen Kinnock, the Labour spokesman, is on his feet at the moment, obviously arguing that the government should keep in the amendment passed in the Lords on this independent monitoring committee having a good look at the issue of whether Rwanda is a safe country or not. The government will win that vote comfortably. Earlier today, they won 2 votes, knocking out Lords amendments with majorities of 77 and 71. Now, this debate, which started just before 10 o'clock, can go for an hour, but I suspect it may not, because there is obviously an impatience to get this over and done with. Then goes back to the Lords, and at that point, we expect that the Lords will say, OK, the elected House can have its way. That is probably going to be round about midnight, possibly a bit before, possibly a bit after, but all that talk earlier in the day of camp beds, sleeping bags and so on, I don't think they're going to be necessary, but it has been a long protracted battle, a real battle between the Commons and the Lords and of course the government and its opposition. The PM keeps going about Labour. Shouldn't forget that, of course, there's plenty of crossbench peers have been voting against the government, bishops as well, and, of course, the Liberal Democrats. Combined opposition in the Lords, but it looks as though the Lords are about to wave the right white flag, if you like, and say, OK, you can have your bill. That's probably going to happen in the next couple of hours.
And John will obviously track the bill's progress through the evening. Talk later. Thank you. Now, whatever you think of Donald Trump, you might find it hard to disagree with his defence lawyer today, who told the former president's trial there's nothing wrong with trying to influence the result of an election. That influence, though, was waged through a criminal scheme to corrupt, prosecutors argued, in the way that payments to a porn star were covered up. Our US correspondent James Matthews is at the Manhattan Criminal Courthouse tonight. James.
Hi, Anna. Yeah, I'm struck by how history isn't quite what it used to be. A year ago, when Donald Trump appeared here at this court building for his arraignment, there were crowds several hundred strong. Today, perhaps because of Trump fatigue or certainly Trump familiarity, the crowds have thinned out, rather, in terms of supporters, people who protest, who oppose him, but also international media. That is not to downplay the significance of what's happening in this court building behind me because of who's involved and because of the stakes at play. It is the rare sight, now routine, of a former president on a daily court run. Donald Trump snaked through the streets of Manhattan in the cavalcade that carves a new chapter in US legal and political history. This was a day for opening statements from prosecution and defense, and from the defendant by the door.
This is done as election interference. Everybody knows it. I'm here instead of being able to be in Pennsylvania and Georgia and lots of other places campaigning, and it's very unfair.
Inside the court building in New York's Chinatown, Donald Trump has much to lose and much already lost.
The courtroom is incredibly dingy.
Author Michael Wolff was in the courtroom.
It's very rare for someone like Donald Trump or for any celebrity to be in front of the public for so many hours. I mean, he is naked before us.
The case is that porn star Stormy Daniels was paid off to keep an affair with Trump quiet before the 2016 election. Trump's lawyer made the payment, and when he was reimbursed, it was put through the books as something else. The prosecution said that was the falsification of business records that interfered with the election itself. They said this case is about criminal conspiracy. It was election fraud, pure and simple. Trump's defense attorney told the jury, there's nothing wrong with trying to influence an election. It's called democracy. Opening statement saw Trump's defense unveiled as attack on the former lawyer who paid the porn star and will testify against him. They said he was a liar who was obsessed with getting Trump.
Michael.
How are you?
Michael Cohen has said he was acting on Trump's instruction.
Can I ask, how do you see the trial going?
Yeah, I won't be discussing the trial.
You will testify. Do you think there's any doubt that Donald Trump is guilty?
I know I'll be testifying. That'll be a determination by the judge and the jury.
What do you think of what he has had to say about you? He's been uncomplimentary, to say the least.
He's been uncomplimentary for about 6 years now. Doesn't affect me.
The first witness has now taken the stand. David Pecker, who used to publish the National Enquirer magazine. He helped to orchestrate a so-called catch and kill scheme to catch negative stories about Donald Trump and kill them before they reach the public arena. For Donald Trump, it is the evidence of friends and foes, and his future depends on it. A lonely experience for Donald Trump, by all accounts of those inside courtroom number 1530, at times listening to the judge with his eyes closed, at times left alone at the table whilst his lawyers went for sidebar discussions with the judge. Quite the come down for a man who used to occupy the White House, used to the trappings of wealth, power and authority, now with his fate very much in the hands of others.
James, thank you. Well, while Donald Trump was making his own protest against his trial in New York today, a very different protest was having an impact across the city. New York is home to one of America's top universities, Columbia, and the authorities cancelled in-person classes after days of protest by pro-Palestinian demonstrators and fears from Jewish students over their safety. Our US correspondent, Mark Stone, reports from there.
Shut it down! Shut it down! Outside one of America's top universities, a sight now familiar far beyond here.
Down with Hamas! Victory for Israel!
Two entrenched causes, re-energized through 6 months of turmoil in the Middle East. Two movements, dividing opinion, confounding the police, splintering the politicians. Beyond the campus gates, in Columbia University's quadrangle, an encampment of pro-Palestine students. Their message that the university should cut all ties with Israel.
We are calling for a complete divestment by Columbia from any company complicit in Israeli apartheid and colonization in Palestine, and we are calling for amnesty for all of our students.
Do you believe in Israel's right to exist as a country?
I believe in all people's right to freedom and liberation. And I think centrally what gets lost in the discussion here is that we are talking about a genocide.
A campus campaign became a national debate after this, the arrest of more than 100 of their number late last week. The university president had called in the police after concluding the students represented a clear and present danger to the functioning of the university.
And we came to our homeland. And all of these lunatics...
Back outside where the protests are louder, angrier and not associated with the university, Jewish leaders on this Passover holiday denouncing a movement they condemn as deeply anti-Semitic.
Do not be afraid of being Jewish, especially in New York City.
That's right. The police, so awkwardly in the middle, recognize the challenges.
Could you give us a sense of how challenging this moment is for you, both in terms of your ability to police, but also your judgment as you judge what is and what isn't a crime?
Determining when something goes from protected speech to unprotected speech can require a lot of nuance. And you're right, we have to make calls on a daily basis, and the stakes are high. There's no question about that.
At the heart of all this is the policing and political challenge of how to moderate the conversation, how to keep it moderate, when that now seems to be so open to interpretation. Mark Stone, Sky News in New York.
The policing of pro-Palestinian protests in the UK has led to pressure on the country's biggest force. But today, the head of the Metropolitan Police was backed by his political masters, including the Prime Minister, despite video which showed an officer telling a prominent campaigner that he was openly Jewish. A fuller version of the incident, filmed by Sky News, gave more context to the incident, as our crime correspondent Martin Brunt now reports.
10 days on from the altercation, no let-up in the war of words.
The reality was he came to the march with an entourage of 4 to 5 people and a film crew, sought to break through the stewards, physically push himself past the police in order to walk in front of the march, to provoke and to try to stop it.
I was simply Jewish in the vicinity of these marches, and what we know from 6 months of this is that at these marches we see constant incidents of glorification of terrorism. We see people engaging in all sorts of anti-Semitic hatred, as I saw at that march then.
Mr Falter wants the Met Police Commissioner, Sir Mark Rowley, to resign or be sacked over the words his officer used. The Prime Minister agreed about the language, but wanted Sir Mark to stay.
I do have confidence in him, but that's on the basis that he works to rebuild the confidence and trust of not just the Jewish community, but the wider public, particularly people in London, but more broadly.
Former Met Chief Superintendent Dal Babu said the whole video sequence showed the officer involved had offered to help Mr Falter get around the marchers.
Mr Falter wasn't interested in that, and then he tried to push past the police officers, wasn't prepared to listen and wanted to go against the flow of the march. Now, if I'd been on duty as a police officer at that time, I would have been inclined to have arrested him for assault.
At Scotland Yard, the Commissioner was said to be calm and ready to keep talking about the protests.
The Commissioner met Jewish community leaders in a video call. Again, he apologised for the altercation with Mr Falter. They urged the Commissioner to cut the number of protests, move them to less disruptive locations and to clamp down on demonstrators committing crimes.
The fallout from the march had also prompted meetings with the Commissioner's 2 political masters, the Home Secretary and the Mayor of London, but neither was calling for him to resign. Martin Brunt, Sky News at Scotland Yard.
It has taken more than 6 months, but one of the most senior military officials in post in Israel on October the 7th finally resigned today. The country's head of military intelligence said he had carried that black day with him ever since. Well, the intelligence failure was, of course, unprecedented. That morning, Hamas militants flooded across the border from Gaza into Israel, where the country's security forces caught unaware. The coordinated land, sea and air attack decimated kibbutz across the south of Israel. Overall, around 1,200 Israelis and foreigners were killed. And Hamas and Islamic Jihad fighters took 253 people hostage. The subsequent Israeli offensive on Gaza continues ferociously, with the IDF yet to wipe out Hamas's top military leaders. However, the Gaza Health Ministry says more than 34,000 people have been killed in the Strip. From Tel Aviv, our Middle East correspondent Alistair Bunkle has this report.
Hamas had been planning and training for the October the 7th attacks for months, but none of Israel's political or military leaders stopped it. 199 days later, and the first senior Israeli official has resigned over those failures. In May last year, the head of Israeli military intelligence had made this prediction.
Since the Guardian of the Walls operation, we see that Hamas in multiple areas is in search of some peace and quiet for Gaza.
He was wrong, and not the only one. In his resignation letter, General Haliva said, "The intelligence division under my command did not live up to the task we were entrusted with. I carry that black day with me ever since." Passover is the festival that celebrates the freedom of Jews from Egyptian slavery. But tonight, Israelis sat down to a Seder meal and will think of the 132 hostages still being held in Gaza.
He will be the funny guy.
The last time I saw Ella Ben-Ami was just before Christmas. Almost 4 months on, her father Ohad is still a hostage, and negotiations have broken down.
Tonight is a very hard night because my father is the one in the family who makes the holidays funnier.
Do you still have faith in the negotiation process, in the military campaign, in the politicians who lead the country? Do you have faith that there will be a breakthrough?
If I'm not going to be faithful for them, I don't have anything, because this is what we have now. We have this situation, and I need to be with faith to be optimistic and to keep smiling for my family.
In Gaza, they know an Israeli assault on Rafah is coming. In places where the IDF have withdrawn, people have returned to look for loved ones buried in haste. This makeshift graveyard was dug outside of one of Gaza's biggest hospitals. Netanyahu is running out of options to get the remaining hostages home. If more military commanders resign over October the 7th, he might be running out of time too. Alistair Bunkle, Sky News in Tel Aviv.
Until last July, Hugh Edwards would have been on air right now presenting the BBC's version of News at 10. The corporation's best-known news presenter has now resigned after 9 months off air, following allegations he paid a young person for sexually explicit photos. Well, our arts and entertainment correspondent Katie Spencer is here, and his future had certainly been left undetermined for some time, hadn't it, Katie?
Yeah, as you say, 9 months after reports that he had paid this young person for sexual images, if you like. Nothing criminal, but certainly, given that his role as the BBC was fronting a leading news programme, questionable judgment, but certainly in no way anything that needed to be investigated by criminally. What this does today is allows the Hugh Edwards and the BBC effectively to move on from this. We know that the BBC had an internal investigation into the process itself. They had apologised for taking too long to actually speak to Hugh Edwards. What was left, though, was actually this internal investigation to work out whether or not Edwards should or could return to the job that he once had. Today's statement effectively means that they don't have to deal with that. And in the statement that they put out today, they said that Hugh Edwards has resigned and left the BBC. After 40 years of service, Hugh has explained that his decision was made on the basis of medical advice from his doctors. The BBC has accepted his resignation, which it believes will allow all parties to move forward. We don't believe it appropriate to comment any further. A very formal response for them. No thanks for the work that he's done for the BBC, but crucially it avoids them having to rake over exactly what happened.
Katie, thank you. The FTSE ended the day on a new record high. The index closed today's trading session on 8,023 points. That's up 1.6% on the day. The previous record of 8,012 was set just over a year ago. 2 men accused of spying for China have been charged under the Official Secrets Act. Former parliamentary researcher Christopher Cash and Christopher Berry, who's from Witney in Oxfordshire, are accused of espionage from 2022 until February last year. A television tower in the Ukrainian city of Kharkiv has been struck by what local officials believe was a Russian missile. The 240-metre-high tower broke in half and fell to the ground after the impact, as Moscow continues to target Ukrainian infrastructure. Now, Sir Keir Starmer is a well-known football fan, and in the game's parlance, winning the election later this year might be seen as a bit of an open goal. He was launching Labour's plans for school sport today and wouldn't commit to an end to sell-offs of school playing fields. He also told our sports correspondent Rob Harris difficult questions over foreign ownership of major clubs should be left to the future football regulator.
To the home of England's football teams for Keir Starmer, mixing with future Lionesses.
Who's the team that you think would got to beat them?
Everyone. The election fixture, his focus. The Labour leader at St George's Park pitching his plans for sport, talking exclusively to Sky News.
How will you fund sport when there's defence, housing, security to be able to fund, and the finances are so stretched?
Of course it's going to be tight. The economy has been broken under this government, but there are things that we can do in terms of the funding that goes into our schools.
Does this mean no more playing fields sold off under a Labour government?
It doesn't mean no more playing fields, but we've got a deficit of football pitches, so we need more pitches, not less pitches.
The football regulator bill's going through Parliament.
Yes.
You seem happy with the government.
Well, I think there's a cross-party consensus that we need a regulator.
The regulator won't be looking at foreign ownership. Are you happy with countries lacking democracy, without LGBT rights, without full women's rights? Are you happy with them owning national institutions like Premier League clubs or any club?
There's a role, obviously, for the Secretary of State under the bill, as it's drafted, it may be amended as we go along, to set the guidance in place. And I think that's the place where we need to look at the detail of it. It supports the lower league clubs to give them the financial sustainability that we need. But we must also protect the Premier League. We've got the best football in the world in this country, and I want to make sure that's fully protected.
But it does talk in the bill about the regulator needing to have regard for foreign and trade policy. Should morality be at the expense of the money and the finances?
Well, I think this is something which we're going to have to tease out in the bill as we go through it.
You're an Arsenal fan. You've got Visit Rwanda on your shirt, a country with human rights abuses, lacking democratic freedoms. Are you happy with them funding your club and your team?
Well, I think there's a massive difference between supporting a team and the gimmick that the government is wasting hundreds of millions of taxpayer money on and having not removed a single person to Rwanda.
Keir Starmer making sport an election battleground, pledging to give more youngsters the chance to emulate Serena Wiegmann's Lionesses is an election-winning tactic. Rob Harris, Sky News, Staffordshire.
Well, that was Sky News at 10. Coming up, we'll take a first look at tomorrow's newspapers in the press preview tonight, joined by Zoe Grunewald, political correspondent at The Independent, and Ryan Saby, deputy political editor of The Sun. Welcome to both of you. And certainly among the stories we will be discussing, this story on the front of the Metro. Its headline, a statement from the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, saying we'll fly in July. Well, MPs are voting right now on whether to stick to their guns over at Rwanda. That result expected very shortly. Back with that and the papers in just a moment. Well, this is Sky News. In just a moment, the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages. First, though, a reminder of our top stories. The Prime Minister is edging closer to the approval of his attempt to send migrants crossing the Channel to Rwanda this evening. Donald Trump has described today as a sad day in America as he became the first former US president to stand in a criminal trial. And one of America's top universities, Columbia, has cancelled in-person classes after days of protests by pro-Palestinian demonstrators because of fears for the safety of Jewish students. Well, hello there, watching the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages. Time then to see what's making the headlines with Zoe Grunewald, political correspondent at The Independent, and Ryan Saby, deputy political editor of The Sun. Welcome to both of you. So, as ever, let's kick off with the front pages, shall we? Starting with the Metro, the Prime Minister, it says, insisting the first flight carrying migrants to Rwanda will take off in July. No ifs, no buts. But some of his Tory peers don't agree. They are saying the plan won't work. That's the lead for The Eye. It's also on the front of the Daily Mail. They say the planes have been booked and migrants will soon be detained, ready for removal. The Times also has the Prime Minister's plans to push on with the Rwanda bill. On its front page, the government has reserved 2,200 detention spaces for the first round of deportations. The government officials have said those deportations will begin as soon as Mr Sunak's Rwanda bill gains royal assent and the new treaty with the African country was ratified, which is expected to happen this week. That is the lead for The Telegraph. The Guardian features an exclusive interview with the Met Police Commissioner, Mark Rowley, who has praised the professionalism of the police sergeant who anti-Semitism campaigner at a pro-Palestinian march at the weekend had criticised. The Daily Mirror has an exclusive with a facial comparison expert who says a man wanted for questioning over the murder of TV star Jill Dando 25 years ago bears a striking resemblance to a Serbian assassin. And the Financial Times has Donald Trump arriving in court for the first day of his hush money trial on its front page. The FTSE also the lead story there. Let's head to the Commons, shall we, first of all? An amendment being voted on right now. We are anticipating that, of course. One left, effectively, sent back by the Lords, their demand that there should be an independent monitoring committee looking at whether Rwanda was safe or not. So the government now voting on this. Another committee about effectively Afghan veterans or people who had helped in Afghanistan help the UK government. There seems to have been an agreement on that. So let's bring in our guests then to talk about this as we look at these pictures. Zoe Grunewald and Ryan Saby, welcome to both of you. And Ryan, why don't you talk us through? Is this the last stage, or after this it'll go back to the Lords, won't it?
Yeah, so you can see right now in the House of Commons that you have the tellers moving up towards where the Speaker sits, and they're just about ready to reveal the result. The MPs would have gone through those division lobbies. They're all waiting there for that result to come in. And you've got three of the tellers there. They're waiting for one more to come in and actually tell the result. It's just a few seconds away.
Order. Let's listen, shall we?
The ayes to the right were 312. The noes to the left were 237.
Thank you. The ayes to the right, 312. The noes to the left, 237. So the ayes have it, the ayes have it. Unlock.
So a majority for the government there. Do you want to throw out, effectively, this Lord's Amendment was the question they were faced with, about independent monitoring, looking at whether Rwanda was safe or not? And Zoe, a comfortable majority once again for the Commons as it goes back to the House of Lords this evening.
Yes, so it's going to go back to the House of Lords now, and we're going to either see the Lords push forward again with this particular proposal, or we're going to see them back down. I think at this point we know, as Rishi Sunak set out earlier today at the presser, that he's very much expecting this piece of legislation to pass tonight and to be signed in by the King probably tomorrow. At this point, the question for the Lords will be, how strongly do they feel about this, or is it now time to let this legislation pass, let the government do its job, and let the people get this manifesto promise from the Conservatives, which of course is their Rwanda legislation.
Problem is for the newspapers, we've had all the first editions already. Here they are. She wafts them around, and yet we've not yet had this crucial final stage of this. It's going to happen, we think, around midnight, don't we? So perhaps a slightly different tack from the newspapers. Let's take a look at the eye. The Rwanda plan won't work, Tory critics tell Sunak. You've got to find a way of doing the story without it actually being the result, haven't you?
That's right. You've got some great language from Rishi Sunak, and from a journalistic point of view. Enough is enough. No ifs, no buts. We've actually heard that many times before. You can go back to David Cameron. You can go back to Theresa May, all talking about how they want to get immigration under control. But this is Rishi Sunak's no ifs, no buts moment, and he's saying that those flights will actually take off. He wants them to take off in the next 10 to 12 weeks, and then there will be a regular rhythm of flights that take off before the summer.
Yeah, and if we'll move on to the Daily Mail. Enough is enough. Some of the language you were talking about. We're ready for Rwanda liftoff. And certainly Rishi Sunak was at pains to point out the detailed planning that had gone into this, and that an airfield and an airline had been booked to remove these people.
Because one of the criticisms that's been levied at the government over the past few weeks is you may want to pass this legislation, but how much are the operational details, actually put into practice? So do you have an airline that's prepared to put these flights into practice? Is there somewhere for migrants to go when they arrive in Rwanda? And now Rishi Sunak has come forward and said, all this is ready. It all now just lies in the hands of the Lords and the Labour Party to pass this legislation and let the government get on with it. And I think at this point we are going to see now, finally, after years of actually battling and trying to get this put into law, we're going to see it actually be ratified. But the question now is it going to work? Are we going to see legal challenges? Is it actually going to act as a deterrent, as the Conservative Party are claiming? And actually, as we can see from the eye, even Tory MPs are saying they're concerned about the feasibility of this legislation. So it by no means is the end, unfortunately, for listeners, of the Rwanda debacle after tonight.
Yeah. Yes, Tory sources close to the scheme believe the figure is too optimistic. The figure they're talking about, Sunak challenged to send 2,000 migrants in 6 months, but admits the first deportation flight will not depart until the summer. The Metro PM we fly in July. He's made promises about this, but why is this date? Why is the when so important here?
I think it's that build-up to the general election. I think you've got the time frame over the summer. It looks like he's actually doing something about it, and he's put so much emphasis on this. This is a deal that was actually signed. It was Priti Patel, who was Home Secretary back in April 2022. She went out to Rwanda, signed the paperwork, and we're only just seeing it now going into legislation. And we haven't even actually seen a plane get off the ground. Now I think there could be only one thing worse than actually not getting this legislation passed for the government, is actually getting it passed, because they've said this is a deterrent. What happens then if boats still come over? And that's the trouble for them. They've still got this problem of getting people over to Rwanda, and actually boats still coming over here.
Yes, and the Labour mantra, more Home Secretaries have gone to Rwanda than migrants. We've heard that many a time, haven't we? But it poses difficulties if this happens. Big ifs, as we can see from the coverage tonight. If it does happen and it starts to become a deterrent, does Labour still junk it? There are questions for them.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think the Labour Party, I'm sure, will respond accordingly. But it's a sticky policy for them, because on the one hand, immigration is, for some voters, it is a key priority. So they don't want to seem like they are soft on it. If they are going to oppose the Rwanda legislation, they need to present a viable alternative. One thing the Conservative government does say is actually the Rwanda legislation is just part of a broader set of measures that they are implementing to get illegal immigration and net migration down. So, but one of the big things, as we know, is the introduction of safe and legal routes, and also being able to have the mechanisms in place in the Home Office to deal with immigration. So you would hope that the Labour Party would be talking about those things as well. But you're right, if we do see, and I'm very sceptical, but if we do see that the Rwanda scheme becomes successful, you might see a shift in tone, at least, from the Labour Party on whether they will proceed with it.
Well, let's just, talk about the legal routes as pertaining to Afghans. And certainly one of the really big sticking points for the House of Lords was what happens to those Afghans who had helped Allied forces in Afghanistan, and there seems to have been some agreement, doesn't there? The government has backed down on that.
There was a slight form of words from the dispatch box from the minister, who gave the peers in the House of Lords enough wriggle room to actually think we can actually get on side, and being rest assured that the amendment was going to be adhered to in a way that they found fit. So I think they're happy on that point, and that they backed down, but they obviously didn't let go on the other one. But I think on we go back to talk about whether Labour will actually go ahead with it. If this scheme is actually successful, and they get into power, at the end of the year, are they actually just going to get rid of it straight away? I mean, it's not exactly going to be a vote winner, and so you do have to raise questions about whether they would actually get rid of it, if they do get into power.
When you say that, I mean, where is polling on Rwanda? Is it actually popular? I mean, you're possibly coming at it from different political standpoints. So you go first.
I mean, I don't think it is particularly popular. And I think the other thing to note is that even the voters who do like the Rwanda legislation or like the principle of the Rwanda legislation, many of them will only deem it to have worked if it genuinely has quite an instant impact on the number of small boat arrivals. And I think we are all in agreement that that's probably not going to happen. It's going to take some time to see that deterrent effect, if there is one. And I don't believe there will be, because there were 30,000 or thereabouts small boat crossings last year. The Rwanda scheme can take about 2,000 people. I mean, if you were desperately trying to cross the channel, I would still very much fancy my chances. So I don't believe it's going to act as a deterrent. We've also got serious questions about the human rights consequences here. So I think...
Well, they say this bill deals with a lot of those problems raised by the Supreme Court.
And I think it might deal with some of them, but there are questions about whether you can put people on a flight. If you have heavily pregnant women, for example, can you put them on a flight to Rwanda? I don't think you can. So there are still plenty of those details that need to be ironed out. And I think at this point, there really is a failure from the Conservative government to realise that this isn't going to fix their problems. As I say, those who are supportive of the scheme want instant evidence that it's working, and I just don't think this is going to, even if it is successful, I don't think the success is going to be overnight.
And from your paper's readership, is it popular? Is it postbag filling stuff for you? Yeah,
this is the language that they like to hear. We've been hearing enough about it for the best part of 2 or 3 years, 2 or 3 years on this plan alone. But one thing that Labour want to do, they've actually spoken about, offshoring as well. So if they do, they may not like the Rwanda plan, but they would look to other countries, and the EU countries have also looked to it as well. So you just wonder whether everyone is actually ultimately going to end down this road. There is, to deal with the mass migration issue.
Lots of numbers thrown at us today by Rishi Sunak in terms of the preparation that's been done. The Times picks up on some of them, and also says the government, bottom paragraph down here, the government is refusing to say when it will begin detaining migrants amid concerns they would abscond, or they could abscond. Officials have identified 150 who arrived in Britain before March last year who were considered legally watertight cases. They have already been screened by Rwanda before their planned removal. The idea, as the paper says, that it could start within days. 2,200 detention spaces already ready, including judges, court space, etc., to get this going, Zoe.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure the government will have done. But one thing they'll really want is when this passes, they will want to get a flight off the ground as soon as possible to show that it works. And so absolutely makes sense that they will have already done a great amount of legal work here to identify people who might be eligible to fly to Rwanda, if that's the right wording to use. But as I say, the challenges are going to come in waves after this, because although you might have identified some people, there is no way you're going to make a dent in that 30,000 number. Plus, people tend to conflate legal migration and illegal migration as well. And you're not going to get, I don't think, the obvious and visual impact of the Rwanda legislation overnight. And I think that is really how people are going to judge the success of this scheme.
Well, is one flight enough? And the suggestion had been one flight equals a deterrent, and yet Beth Rigby, our political editor, putting the idea of what success looks like to Rishi Sunak today, and he says stopping the boats is success. That is a high watermark, isn't it?
Yeah, and it was also this morning that the Rishi Sunak actually said that the number of people who've come over across the Channel has gone down. We had Lord Carlisle tonight in the House of Lords actually said that they actually slipped out some figures during the press conference. So they'd gone up by 24%, and he actually said it was not a case of stop the boats, it's a case of stop the boasts. You actually want the government to actually calm down on their rhetoric and say, well, perhaps the numbers coming over across the Channel haven't actually gone down.
Well, they'd gone down last year, I suppose, and not the start this year. So it's undoing some of the cuts that they saw last year. Albania was one of the successes. Now it's Vietnamese, he's saying, is part of the problem. And they're hoping to also do a deal on that. So some of the detail of who is coming is quite interesting.
Yeah, I think so. And we're going to see, variations in trends over the years as we see different global conflicts emerging, different economic patterns. You tend to get different concerns flagged by the government about particular countries and an influx of migration from that. But I think all of this really is a distraction from many other policy problems that are going on in this country. I mean, more people care about the cost of living and the NHS than stopping small boats. I think a lot of people in this country are very sensitive to the plight of asylum seekers, and I think this conflation of illegal migration and genuine asylum seekers has become quite dangerous, really. So I think people also object to the Rwanda legislation on kind of moral grounds as well.
And so, final thought then, if it is, you know, dangerous, why has Rishi Sunak put his name to it, you know, done the news conference today, and why choose this hill to die on, if I can put it that way?
I think illegal migration is one of the biggest issues. You look at, you know, as we say, the cost of living crisis, the NHS, and I think tackling illegal migration is such an issue. And seeing those images, you know, of people, you know, arriving in, you know, on the south coast, it just doesn't look very good. It looks like, you know, the country is meant to have taken back control. You know, if anything, those pictures show that you haven't actually done that. And I think it's the imagery almost that plays into this.
Yeah, fascinating. And we watch and wait, see what happens later. Back to the Lords it goes. Could it be the last time? We'll find out later on. Lots more still to come, more of the papers to look at, including the former president on trial. Donald Trump's hush money case opens. Talk about that and more after this.
I think it's going to be a really interesting way to gather data so that we're able to really, truly understand what's going on. And it's an opportunity for people like myself who have had these experiences and various artists to talk about their stories and to make this a subject matter that we can all learn to accelerate change and make a difference so that we're not in this place where this has become normalized. I think a lot of the time, even when you're seeing the successes within the music industry amongst Black women, there's a lot of nuances and things going on in the background. There's a lot of interactions happening with the people that you're working with that you tend to stay quiet about and you don't speak. And it's not a transparent conversation until now. So it wasn't a surprise to me at all. I mean, within my own circles of other Black women and people that mentors that have come before me, this is a conversation that we've always had internally, despite of the successes that might accompany it. So yeah, I wasn't surprised at all. And this is the reason why I wanted to be part of this campaign, to contribute to those stories and experiences coming out and for us to accelerate change. There were overt forms of racism where words were said to me that were awful, which I can't say on camera. But also it's the subtle nuances, the microaggressions that come through in your everyday experience, whether it's me having to Europeanize myself or if my hair isn't a certain way, having to dress and be a certain way and feeling under pressure to not embrace my Blackness or my identity. There was also lots of social media bullying as well, where there would be comments that would be said to me in reference to my race. A sense of sexism and the patriarchy, where there's a transactional sense of manipulation where I have to do something and to fragment myself in order to have success. And so you have this sense of pressure as a woman and as a Black woman to act a certain way in order to progress in your career.
Well, welcome back. You are watching the press preview. With me once again, Zoe Grunewald and Ryan Saby. Welcome back to both of you. Let's go stateside, shall we, to New York and the front page of the Financial Times, in fact, who've put Donald Trump on the front. You know, making history once again, the first former or current president to face trial in this way, Zoe.
Yeah, it's quite a significant moment in history. And we've got yet even more to come with Donald Trump. We know he's facing several different accusations over his behaviour in office and beforehand. And this particular one, obviously, is about the prosecutors have said that Donald Trump tried to corrupt the 2016 election because he directed his team to buy the silence of porn actor Stormy Daniels, who had threatened to go public with the affair. So this is a question of whether Trump's actions in covering up this payment was akin to him trying to basically pressurise the result of the election, cover up his background. And of course, Trump is absolutely defending his actions. His team have said he's been trying to protect his family, his reputation and his brand. And it's just another one of these extraordinary stories that are coming out about Donald Trump, who is likely to become the next president of the USA again. So,
do you think so?
Oh, very, very possibly, unfortunately. So, I mean, it's just extraordinary that we even had this conversation.
Ryan was about to say something there.
You just wonder whether every single time he comes up against the establishment, it just garners support for him. And his supporter base just, his voter share just goes through the roof every time.
The 2016 election campaign was all about free advertising, and this, the president, the porn star, and the alleged payments is all grist to the mill for journalists, isn't it? Shall we move on to the front page of The Guardian? They're exclusive, they say. Sir Mark Rowley, the Met Police Commissioner, has spoken to them, praising the professional conduct of the sergeant who stopped an anti-Semitism campaigner at a pro-Palestinian march. I'm sure people have seen the video of this and our footage of it as well. Where would your paper stand on something like this, Ryan, do you think?
I think when it comes down to Gideon Falter, or any Jewish person, they should be able to go about their business, in their daily life. If they're going out on a Saturday and there's a protest on, they should be able to do what they want. However, it does become slightly cloudy when you've got this police officer. Now you've got Sir Mark Rowley actually saying that he was professional in his conduct, and there have been questions raised about the video, if you've seen the short form of it or whether you've seen the actual long form of it. So you just wonder whether, lots of people have raised questions about whether was there any motive or disingenuous motive about the campaign against anti-Semitism campaigner. But Sir Mark Rowley, the Met Police Commissioner, has come out to back his sergeant.
And Rishi Sunak said he had his backing as well today. There had been criticism, obviously, of the situation and the Met Commissioner too. But the point many police officers are saying that if this was two opposing sides of football, you also would not be allowed to move through the crowd. So, there is nuance, I suppose, to this, isn't there?
Yeah, I think so. And, you do ask the question, if he hadn't have intervened and he'd been allowed to walk through and something had happened, if there'd been a scuffle or some, abuse held or something like that, would the police then be criticised for not having intervened? And I think that's all of this, everything the police have to do. They have to make operational decisions based on risk. And I think in this particular circumstance, though the policeman might not have expressed himself in the most sensitive of terms, I think what he was doing was genuinely trying to protect Mr. Falter. And I think he was trying to prevent any possible skirmish happening. And that is, after all, the police's job. So I think really calling for the resignation of the police commissioner on the back of this, I think is a bit extreme, to be honest. I think you could have a conversation with the officer about his language, but I think ultimately it was the right operational decision to be made.
It's very easy sometimes for politicians to call for the head of the Met Police Commissioner, but you've had the Prime Minister, you've had the Home Secretary, James Cleverly, and you've had Sadiq Khan all pretty much giving the backing today.
Yes, and Commissioner Rowley, I completely understand why the sergeant made this assessment. A couple of turns of phrase were clumsy and offensive, and we've apologised for that, but also saying that officers at other protests had been set up by activists using fakery to undermine the force. So clearly it's an issue they're aware of. So, Ryan, thank you both very much indeed. Plenty more still to come, of course, from you later. Thank you for now. Let's take a look at the weather. Well, high pressure attempts to bring settled sunny conditions over the next few days, but it's not strong enough to prevent cloud and patchy rain affecting eastern areas. It's a cold night for northwestern areas where skies are clear overnight. Temperatures will fall low enough for a touch of frost in rural areas. Light winds will allow some mist and fog to form. It will be cloudier to the east of England and the southeast with some patchy rain at times. So cold but bright start for much of the country. Cloud and rain in the southeast will spread westward before clearing southward through the morning. Skies will brighten from the north. Temperatures, though, will be disappointing, peaking at around 14 degrees Celsius with an isolated 16 Celsius in the brighter spots. Well, our coverage continues in Sky News at 11. MPs once again reject changes to the Rwanda safety bill. It's back in the Lords. Anticipate they'll start to debate it at 11:15. Full coverage coming up for you in just a moment.